I get discouraged for sure, and I will quit fighting at some point. And that point is when the first shovel of dirt hits the top of my box 6 feet down.
Hello and welcome to COS Indiana Live as we bring you Roundtable. The Roundtable segment is presented here every fourth Monday of the month at 7 p.m. We'll be focusing on education and discussion of the topics and challenges we all face as we use the Constitution to save the Constitution. Join us now as we bring you COS Indiana Roundtable with our MC, John Ackerman.
And welcome to COS Indiana Roundtable. I'm your host, John Ackerman. This is broadcast number 241 of COS Indiana Live, and our topic is Censorship in America. Right now, I want to bring on one of our great panel members, Ken Kashuba, to tell you about this QR code up in the corner here. Ken, tell our viewers about that.
Hi, John. Yeah, I'm glad that QR code's over you tonight instead of me. That QR code will allow your smartphone to become a subscriber to COS Indiana Live. And that subscription will be very valuable when you start looking at what's available to just subscribers. Things like specific sessions and videos done by our wonderful volunteers here at COS, providing you with education along with other types of downloads and things that can get you educated and bring you closer to what we're doing here at COSIL. So subscribe today, hit that QR code, and we'll be putting a link in the chat as well if you don't have a smartphone. Maybe you're still using a flip phone, but that's the case. We'll give you another way to subscribe.
Okay, and that QR code will remain there for the duration of the roundtable, correct?
Yes, it will. And it also will work when you are looking at this by a recorded version.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Ken. So let's bring on the rest of the panel. Let's see who's going to be here tonight. Dale Parrish. Everybody knows Dale. He's on every week along with Ken. I'm only on once a month. And Gary Harbaugh. Gary's back with us. We're happy to have you here. And we should have at least one more. Dale Tipton, our Indiana State Director. Nice to see you, Dale.
Greetings. Well, we got another one, John, here.
Do we have another one? Charles joining us too. Good to see you, buddy. Glad you're here. Okay. Well, I think the stable is filled now, right? Everybody who's coming is already here.
Right.
And so I want to repeat the topic. It's going to be censorship in America, something that I never thought I would see, but here it is. So I want to start off with the very first question. What is censorship? And former professor, I always want to go to a standard textbook definition. And so I found this, and I want to share it with you. The textbook says that censorship is the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc., that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security. So let that be our starting point. And gentlemen, does anybody have any comment or tweak that you want to make to that definition, or questions you want to put to that definition? What is censorship? Or are we
actually, censorship is beep. Censorship beep.
Okay, sorry, good. A lively demonstration of censorship. Yeah, here it comes. Okay.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, John, I think censorship to me is hiding the truth, and and that's based on somebody's definition of truth. But to me, it's withholding, hiding, preventing, whatever you want to, however you want to describe it. I guess the truth coming out is, in my opinion, is what censorship.
Okay, that's an interesting definition. I might challenge you on that, because what if somebody's trying to put out something that's not true? I might want to censor that. But anyway, it's good to get these ideas on the table. Yep. And by the way, if you're watching live on either Facebook or YouTube, you can contribute to this conversation. You can answer the question yourself, or you can pose a question to the panel just by making a comment in the comment box. Only if you're watching live. If you're watching recorded, nobody's going to be monitoring that. But Ken is monitoring the chat box, and he'll bring anything relevant and that we have time for up on the screen. Anybody else want to contribute to our general understanding of censorship? Dale?
I noticed that whenever you were reading your definition there, you didn't say anything about disinformation or misinformation.
I did not. Standard textbook definition didn't include that stuff, but
relatively new concepts, I think. But
concepts,
they definitely play into what we're discussing.
I think some of the powers of the dark side of the Force invented those terms in order to suppress truth from getting out. At least that's my opinion. Dale Parrish gave his opinion, and I gave mine.
You do agree on the truth thing, huh? Okay.
Well, if they start to label truth as misinformation or disinformation,
I think we should use a broader definition.
All right.
That's, to me, it's really information control, and it may be eliminating some information. It may be spreading other information.
Okay. Information control. And that makes me think of the great prescient book, 1984. Quite often these days, I feel as if we're living in 1984. Control of information. Okay, we've had a little conversation about what censorship is. Now let's move on. My next question is, when is censorship needed? And I want to lay this foundation there that some things ought to be censored. So I want to throw that open to the panel right here. Charlie, Dale. Okay, Dale goes first.
Yeah, I think one of the glaring examples in my mind is pornography when it comes to minors.
Okay,
certainly
that ought to be censored. Okay, Charles, what were you going to say?
I would certainly say self-censorship is necessary. I have a couple different podcasts, and on some of them, I swear like a sailor. Tonight, I don't plan on doing so. I'm going to self-censor any foul language I might otherwise use. Just like if I'm hanging out with grandma, I will self-censor. So there's a time and a place for censorship.
I don't like that grandma.
He doesn't want grandma to get her sensibilities.
She's very sensitive.
Active, yeah. well, and you must be sensitive too, because you're aware of her sensibilities, and you don't want to, and you don't want to offend somebody that you love. Ken, what do you have?
Just my own opinion, a portion I think of something that should be censored is in a military situation where we want to censor information that might give information to the enemy or those that we might be in war with. That should be censored.
Yeah. And the government has various levels of classifications for information, and Dale Tipton could probably tell us all about that. I've never worked for the government, much less the FBI, but I feel like they've overused the classification. There are some things that are legitimate to classify, that is to censor, so the enemy doesn't receive that information. But I think it's been overused and abused in recent decades. Okay, any other ideas on when it might be needed before we jump into the juicy stuff? Okay, Gary?
I think one of the classic legal definitions is, to prohibit somebody from yelling fire in a crowded theater, that is to prevent a stampede. But there's not a lot of things that I think ought to be censored, and I think that more information is better. Let the public sort it out. People are not stupid. People can usually sort out what's true and what's not, and even things that might be a threat to national security. Says who? And if there's everything is out there completely uncensored, how's the enemy going to figure out what's legit and what isn't? And so I think that there's too much attempt to manage and control information, and that as a free society, we're better off with more information rather than less.
Good point. Thanks, Gary. Dale, did you have another comment?
Yeah. What about threats to other individuals? I mean, one individual actually threatening another individual with physical harm. Is that something that should be censored?
Good question. I don't know.
That's one of those instances of let them go ahead and do it, so you can pinpoint the crazy people. Let the insane people say the insane things. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. Let the insane people say the insane things, so that you know who the nutcases are. If you're censoring everybody, then they're kind of hidden from you. Let alone somebody threatening your life, then you can hone in on that target.
Interesting point. Yeah, I never thought of that one. Okay, so there are some times that it's important and needed. So let's move on. The flip side of that question is this next question: when is censorship harmful? And I want to start off with a little quotation that's attributed to Benjamin Franklin. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech. Subduing the freeness of speech. So that's one time when it could be harmful. Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, I think we have a viewer comment that might kick this off. I think it shows an example of when it's harmful. Certain Elf says it's not the media's job to censor the news, only to report it.
Indeed, yeah.
Makes it harmful.
Okay. Gary, you have a thought there?
Yeah, I mean, I think censorship is almost always harmful, and it's destructive of freedom. And again, let people speak freely, and the crazy people show who they are, and the sane people show who they are, and leave it up to trusting the public to figure out which is which.
Okay. Dale Parrish, was your hand up there?
No.
Okay. You must have just been waving at a fly or something. Dale Tipton.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up this piece. There's a fellow named Jake Denton, who is a research associate at the Tech Policy Center for the Heritage Foundation. And he put together some work back in 2022 regarding the 2022 midterm elections. And that was kind of where this censorship idea and suppressing political speech and that kind of thing really took off. And he focused on a group that they call them, it's the EIP, the Election Integrity Partnership. And these guys they're made up of 4 entities that are very influential. The first one is Stanford University's Internet Observatory. The second is the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public. The third is the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. And the fourth is called Graphica, and it's a social media analytics firm that is interestingly made up largely of former U.S. intelligence officers. And so these guys get together and have been in contact with, it seems they did some email freedom of information requests, and there's at least 45 officials at various federal agencies and within the White House that regularly converse with social media companies about removing undesirable content from their platforms. And this is content coming from the administration's political opposition. So if all of those voices are taken off the air, it mentions 4,800 URLs that were targeted. to suppress the speech from there. And
Mm.
just within Twitter, these things were shared more than 22 million times,
Wow.
and so eventually taken down. So um, not only are these guys harmful, but they're government funded. They receive grants from the Department of State and Homeland Security in the millions of dollars. So it's basically taxpayer funded to hide one side of a political argument, which is astounding to me.
Hmm. And I would say that is definitely when censorship is harmful. When you're suppressing one side of a political argument, doesn't matter which side it is. Both sides need to be heard. Yeah, Charles.
Just a quick anecdotal, just me, a personal example from my life. Supervising several different YouTube channels, including this one, it is very difficult when, because you get all kinds of comments. It's very difficult to not filter them. On my own channels, YouTube allows you to click anything from no comments whatsoever to some automated moderation to free for all. And I turn on the free for all because, it increases engagement, but you get some really rude, awful comments 50% of the time. It's very difficult to control that urge to delete those, right? And that's just on a personal level. I can't imagine when it comes down to the turnout of an election or the giving up of one's power. So, I get to keep my power if I just kind of suppress a little truth, a little, something that's uncomfortable for me or that's not in my best interest. Then human nature dictates that automatically people would shift that narrative or information flow towards their advantage, let alone a YouTube channel. So it's just whoever's in control, inevitably anybody being tested with that level of power would abuse it. It's only a matter of time.
Indeed. I would say within certain limits, most comments on, say, like a YouTube channel could be seen as helpful because they increase the number of viewers that you're going to get.
The engagement,
the more chatter there is, the more engagement there is, the more eyeballs see that YouTube channel. So that's a good thing. But there are probably some things that, like, for example, this YouTube channel, there are probably some things that we don't want the John Birch Society coming in here and monopolizing against the Convention of States. Now, I hope I don't get censored for saying JBS. Okay, Ken, I see your hand.
Yeah, we've got a viewer comment that I think most people understand. Well, I hope most people understand when it comes to social media platforms. But I'm going to go ahead and post the question because I think it's good for people who may not be aware to really understand. So this is the comment again from Certain Elf, and he says, when a company creates a social platform, are they allowed to create rules that censor content that users must agree to? Do we sign away our rights when we agree to the terms of service? I think it's a pretty obvious answer. I think most of us understand when these social platforms have the ability to regulate their platforms
on a whim. They do so regularly on a whim, and they don't do it just when they rewrite those rules, they are reacting to the news. Essentially, they're reacting to the real world. They're not just getting together and going, what's the best for everybody here? They're watching the news, and then based on current events, they change their TOS, and that's obviously dangerous.
Yeah, and I'm pretty certain they change their rules in a way that benefits their narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Some pretty good examples of when it's harmful. Dale Tipton.
Just another thought on the educational side of things. I've talked with a number of, I guess you could call them conservative-leaning college students who basically did not feel that they could express their true beliefs on certain political subjects in the college environment because they felt that that their grades would be threatened if they went against the kind of the party line that was coming from a given professor. And so if you want to keep your grades up, basically the message was you kept your mouth quiet unless you believed exactly as your professor believed.
Yeah, good point.
Hmm.
Good point. Gary?
I think part of it is that, and this is kind of what Dale is pointing out, part of it is that, what people are saying is being suppressed. But the other part is the opportunity of the public, people who want to know, to hear the viewpoints from all different directions, that's taken away. And really, nothing is more destructive of our freedom in this country, I think, than the suppression of free speech.
Mm-hmm. It is the First Amendment, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Freedom of speech. Yeah.
And when people are fearful of saying something that, people will, something that will be unpopular, and they self censor out of fear, that's bad. I mean, I agree with the idea that we should self censor, but when people self censor out of a fear, not that they're going to, well, maybe that they are going to offend some people. I mean, everything that you say, some people may like it and some people may not, but the fact that it needs to be said and we should have the freedom to offend people if we want to, then I think that's where we want to go.
Obviously, it depends on what if you're CBS, ABC, NBC being the original channels, they usually used to have a certain kind, they all kind of work together to kind of regulate their own industry. But then when these other niche channels pop up, Comedy Central pops up. And so they I don't know how they are today. Maybe they've changed. But back in the day, they would obviously say all kinds of wild stuff and offend everybody. And that's where they found success. So it does depend. It always depends on that environment. I think the other week we talked about the Hays Code, which was the MPAA back in I think the 30s and 40s. The film industry got together because the government was basically saying, I think after the Roaring 20s, they were like, your movies are getting a little racy, and if you don't clean them up, we will. And that's the thing, is that when they self-censor, they end up making some of the best films ever made, because they don't abide by the short-term thinking of, if we put TNA and a bunch of gratuitous sex and violence into these movies, in the short term, you might make a big box office, word of mouth, and people go, ooh, let's go see this dirty movie. But when you clean up your act, you end up making something like The Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind, something that is timeless by not abiding by the quick buck, right? So that is a form of self-censorship, when the entire film industry gets together and says, let's abide by these rules. You can look up the Hays Code. It's like the bad guys shouldn't get away with it. And I mean, there are certainly some rules that should be thrown out these days, but it's stuff like that kind of lends to better art. So it's just one of those contextual things. It's not always good, but it goes back to the whole, just because you can say something or can display something, should you? And that's the question everybody has to ask themselves before they engage in any kind of art or conversation.
Yeah. Very good point. Yeah, Dale.
Just another thought. Would it also be censorship if speech was not suppressed, but if it was rebranded? For example, if you decided to call a protest an insurrection, is that censorship? It certainly puts a different spin on things and rebrands it, but it's definitely something to think about.
It's kind of introducing an ingredient of propaganda. It's adding, it's kind of shifting towards propaganda at that point.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
I think you could say that propaganda and censorship go together. They're one hand clapping the other. When you put forth certain information and suppress other information, you can really control what people believe and what people think. And that's what's happening in our country, and has been probably for much longer than we realize.
Dale.
As I researched this, John, I found a piece that talked about examples of censorship in different administrations that we've had in this country, and I found it very interesting and thought provoking. And I just one example that comes to my mind is, I think this was during the Bush administration, G.W. Bush, that I think I got this right, that they wanted department, whatever department controls or addresses climate change, they wanted them to withhold that information, not talk about that information, don't publish that information. That's a form of censorship, don't you think?
I would think so.
Even though we may not agree with that, our climate change may be something that we doesn't fit our ideology, but to use government forces to because that happens to be the administration's ideology at the time, is that a form of censorship?
The withholding of information.
Yeah.
Good point. Ken, what do you have?
Well, Dale's bringing up the topic of the administration has led to a perfect segue for this comment from a viewer that we have tonight, from David Nally. He says the administration has been found to have censored speech, but where is the accountability? No one is ever punished.
Boy, that is true. That is true.
I mean, we've talked about things like censorship or things that we have been glaring constitutional problems. Yet we go right on, and the Constitution continues to get trampled, and there's never any accountability, never any consequences. I don't understand. I think if there were some consequences, these administrations and these bureaucrats might have a second thought about what they're forcing down people's throats.
If anything, the only consequence is reward. Not only do they get away with it, but they're rewarded by whatever it may be. You do something and then you just deny it until it sticks, and then you actually see reward. So why not do it?
Yeah. I keep hearing high government officials say that so-and-so, when we find the culprit, he or she will be held accountable. And I don't know what it means, because I've never seen anybody held accountable.
Well, I think what we're looking at here is a glaring example of the breakdown of morals in our country. If people that were electing to our federal government and our leadership had any type of morals, we would see a whole lot less of what we're seeing today.
Good point. Good point. Well, we've talked in generalities here. I want to peel the next layer off of the onion and go a little bit deeper and ask the panel for some examples, some hard and fast examples of censorship, maybe some appropriate examples, maybe some inappropriate examples, but gentlemen, give us some examples of censorship that you've experienced or witnessed or viewed or something. Dale Tipton first, and then Dale Parrish.
Well, one thing comes to mind that everybody is well familiar with, but I can think of a young man, on one of these type of broadcasts that utilized the word vaccine. And that's one of those things. Should I say it again? Vaccine.
It's a good thing YouTube's terms of service have changed, and now you can say it.
Oh, they changed that, huh?
Yeah. We actually this channel had a strike for months.
Yeah.
Months. And you have to just sit on it and wait. And you actually have to. They force you to go to school. They call it. Like, you actually have to attend. So if you have a copyright strike, you have to attend copyright school. If you have a terms of service strike, you have to, or community strike, you have to go to community guidelines school or whatever, and then it sits on your account until you don't do it again. But if you keep doing it, they can just delete your channel.
Is that like a re-education camp?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Okay. Dale, were you finished with that?
You bet.
Okay. I thought you said Maxine, and but this is her brother Vaccine. Okay. Okay. Dale Parrish, what did you have?
Well, I think one of the glaring examples of censorship here recently was the Hunter Biden laptop story and the 2020 election, and how that was so blatantly censored and not allowed to be brought out and discussed.
Yeah.
So
Dale, that was Russian disinformation.
wasn't okay.
That's what they tried to make people believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and what was it, 50 some former intelligence officials signed that letter that said this has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation.
Yeah.
And none of those 50 some men or women will talk about it today because the FBI has verified it was Hunter's laptop. Was it the New York Post who broke that story? And then Twitter wouldn't allow it to be reposted. And then, you know, of course, the New York Times and Washington Post and Los Angeles Times, the big papers in the United States, wouldn't carry that story. And after the election, you know, surveys showed that a certain percentage of voters would have changed their vote had they known that before Election Day of 2020. So that's a glaring example of censorship. Gary, did I see your hand a moment ago?
Yeah, I think if you just go back to the whole era of COVID, all kinds of examples of censorship. They censored information about ivermectin. They censored information, true information about how masks were basically useless. They suppressed information about even things like vitamin D. They suppressed information, you know, about basically it was harmless to be outdoors. You had almost zero risk of getting it if you were outdoors. And just, I mean, I couldn't even begin to tell you all the things they suppressed and censored during the period that COVID was active.
Yeah, I think it was one of the worst periods in the life of our country concerning censorship and concerning a lot of other things too. Dale Parrish?
Yeah, I think more and more information is coming out regarding January 6th and information that was withheld. And so, I mean that's a form of censorship. I think that the truth is slowly coming out more and more, but that was a form of censorship.
It was, yeah. And the January 6th committee, you know, having primetime hearings and selectively showing and editing certain frames of security camera video and keeping tens of thousands of hours of security camera video censored. And some of that came out under Speaker McCarthy. Some of it has come out under Speaker Johnson. And I just wonder if it's all ever going to be released. But yeah, they've been withholding the truth and promoting this word insurrection. And it's interesting to me, of the hundreds of citizens who've been prosecuted, not one has been charged with or convicted of insurrection.
Right.
It's trespassing on government property and obstructing a government procedure, something like that. But yet certain media outlets continue to call it an insurrection. Okay, do we have any other examples, Ken?
Not an example, but being that we're talking about January 6th, one of our viewers was a little bit of ahead of us bringing that up. So I'm just going to show his comment. David Todd talks about how about people being held accountable for spying on American citizens, United States citizens in prison since the beginning of the year for January 6th. So
yeah,
our viewers are on top of this, John.
Yeah, good point, David. Thank you for that question. Yeah, there's a lot going on, and usually, you know, I've lived long enough and I've seen enough history be developed. You won't get the full story until maybe 2 generations or 3 generations after events happen. Eventually, the whole truth comes out, you know. So I don't know if I'll be around when that happens, but it'll all come out, and history will record the full truth. Yeah, not just these little snippets. Dale Tipton.
Yeah, well, just another thought on the January 6th idea. Whenever we're thinking about censorship as speech being, stopped or whatever, and you think of the group of people that came there that day, to protest, to make their voices heard, whatever. And then they found themselves sometime later being arrested, and they're still arresting people. It's happening on almost a daily basis where additional individuals were arrested. The last I read, the potential number of indictments and arrests could reach 2,500 by
Wow.
the time they get to the end of this.
Hmm.
But for everybody that has to go through that legal process, and it's very expensive for them,
Yeah.
the next time they think about going to a political protest or a meeting, are you going to get in the car and go, or are you just going to go, well, I guess I better stay home because I don't want to go through this again. I
Hmm.
mean, that's an extreme form of oppressive censorship, I think.
Yeah.
Fear
And
factor.
and it's just incredible to me that they're still arresting people more than 3 years after the fact. Yet nobody knows who planted those pipe bombs
Right.
the night before at the DNC and the RNC headquarters. They can't figure that one out.
Yeah.
But they're figuring out all these other 2,000 some cases of
Yeah.
people, many of whom really did nothing wrong. But, some of them did. We've seen the footage of acts of violence and destruction of government property, and I kind of think those people ought to be prosecuted. But what about the ones who I saw a video where Capitol Police opened the door and let citizens into the Capitol building, and they were just walking around looking and taking selfies and having a good time. Why should they be prosecuted, when we can't find the people who planted the pipe bombs? So that's off topic, but I had to rant on something. Okay, listen, we're just past halfway of our hour, and so I want to take a little break now, and we have a video from the esteemed Gary Harbaugh on the debt avalanche, and I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking forward to seeing what Gary has to share with us this time.
Hi, it's Gary. I want to talk another one about in our series about debt and spending. What I want to talk about is the fact that the United States dollar is the most used world reserve currency. What does that mean, and why does it benefit us, or how does it affect us? A reserve currency is a currency that other nations want to hold their wealth in. And the reason they want to hold their reserves in this currency of the United States dollar is because most of the world's trade takes place in United States dollars. So let's say Brazil wants to buy German made automobiles. What they first do is they need to get US dollars in order to pay the Germans for those automobiles. And they get that by bidding, that is, buying U.S. Treasury bonds, bills, or notes in U.S. Treasury auctions. So the government needs to borrow money. Brazil shows up and says, we're going to convert our currency into dollars, and we're going to use those dollars to buy your Treasury bills. And then they turn around and use those Treasury bills to pay the Germans for the automobiles. Germany then can use those T-bills to buy from other countries, or they can simply hold them for their own purposes. And most of the world's trade takes place in US dollars. So every country in the world typically wants to hold US dollars in the form of US Treasury bonds, bills, and notes. So they are big buyers of Treasury bonds, bills, and notes at the auctions or on the secondary market. So this benefits the United States in the sense that we can just create new debt, and other people give us their currency that represents real purchasing power in order to buy our debt that we can then use to buy things from those countries. Most of the world trade takes place in using treasury bonds, bills, and notes. There's also a significant amount of world trade, illegal world trade, shall you say, drug dealers, human traffickers, in U.S. currency. Might surprise you to learn that about 45% of all of the United States currency that is in circulation around the world is in circulation outside of the United States. And that's primarily used in illegal trafficking of arms, people, drugs, things like that. And again, we benefit from that because everybody wants dollars. Dollars are a known commodity. And even though we think the US dollar is losing value, and clearly it is, it's someone has described it, it's the dollar milkshake in a world of garbage milkshakes. So most of the other countries of the world, their currency is even worse than the US dollar. And there are trillions of US dollars out there. And so they become the medium of exchange in a lot of illegal activity. There's a lot more to this story. That's as much as I'm going to cover right now.
Very interesting, Gary. Thank you. And makes me want to see episode number 3. And the whole idea is this is part of your series on the debt avalanche. And if we don't stop the debt avalanche, we will lose our status as the world currency reserve. Am I on the right track there?
That's entirely possible. And
yeah.
Hard to predict, but it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah. And what we'd like to see happen is that possibility shut off. Dale.
Yeah, I think what Gary's doing here, in my opinion, we're all familiar with the debt clock and the $34 trillion in debt and everything that our country's in. But I think what Gary's doing is he's pointing up some other aspects of this debt issue that I know I'm not aware of, haven't been aware of. So I hope this is informing people of some other issues related to the debt issue that we're facing in our country.
Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, I've learned things. Yep. Thank you, Gary. Okay, we got a couple more questions to address before the hour is up. And this next one is, okay, we've seen some specific examples, but what harm, what bad things have happened because of censorship? And we'll take a few examples here. Anybody have something to get us started with, Gary?
I think going back to COVID, I think thousands upon thousands of people died because information was suppressed that could have helped save lives. And so that's about as bad as it gets when people die because of censorship.
Yep. Untold numbers of deaths worldwide that I've never seen such a worldwide calamity, and I hope never to see one again, where so many wrong decisions were made all around the world. Okay, Ken.
Yeah, I think just an example that comes to my mind, I think our elections have been harmed by censorship.
Okay. Yep. Any other ideas? Dale, Tipton?
Well, just to follow up on what Ken said, the 2020 election, if in fact the laptop story and other factors, the censorship that took place, if in fact that changed the outcome of that election, just look at one area, just the impact of illegal immigration and the number of people who have illegally come into our country since that time. I mean, just that event alone is costing the country untold billions of dollars. And that's just one policy issue, and there are many, many more.
Good point. The other Dale.
I don't have a specific example in mind, but certainly with all the wars that we're involved in around this world and all the conflicts that we're involved in, how many of those are we involved in because the truth has not been known, or the important information has been censored and kept from us, and therefore I say we, the American people, have allowed our country and our military to be engaged in wars that they maybe should not be engaged in. Just a thought.
Yeah, sure, and that's a big one. untold damage done by that. Charles, you had your hand up too.
Well, we talked about censorship as beep, as just suppressing something, covering something up. But early on, we somewhat expanded it potentially to be the changing of the flow of information. So if I'm looking at that, the first thing I think of is social media. The simplest example today would be the algorithmic difference between what the Chinese are doing, how they really kind of enforce a healthy social media for kids so that they develop, it educates them.
Yeah.
And then with us, it just poisons our minds. And so these days, anybody who allows their kids on social media is out of their minds to allow that. But that, more than anything in my lifetime, has been the biggest instance of how just because people can have access to the internet doesn't necessarily mean that they can be trusted to do so, because it's like staring into the abyss, and the abyss stares back at you. It starts to really manipulate your mind. And so that's where it's like, okay, maybe in this instance the Chinese are correct. Maybe we need some censorship maybe we need an algorithmic change of how social media works, because as it is right now, it's awful. I don't know why I'm the self-censorship guy tonight, but but again, going back to something, the example of the Hays Code is a perfect example. Part of me hates censorship. The other part of me is like, maybe the government should step in and say, hey, social media, you better clean up your act or we will. Now, we all know that they're kind of in bed already anyway, so it's moot. But back in the day, what it led to was a golden age of cinematic art. Yeah. Today, it's just leading to people. I'm sure we all know people who just seem to be like mindless drones, where everything in their brain is dictated to them by this black box. And it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. I don't think there's anything more harmful today psychologically than social media.
Okay, good point. Very good point. And we could take a lesson from the Chinese. They certainly use social media to the benefit of their vision of society. And we don't do that. We certainly don't. Gary, was your hand there?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the social division. Our country is more divided than I think any of us have ever seen in our lifetime. Yeah. And a lot of that is because of censorship and the whole larger thing of information management, whereby I'm convinced people in government want us divided and at each other's throats, because if we're fighting each other, then we're not paying attention to how the government has gotten out of control. And this is a problem that goes back for decades. If anybody wants to look at the historical example, just look up Operation Mockingbird, when in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, government was paying people in the media to get certain stories published. And I'm talking the mainstream media. And later on, I think Carl Bernstein investigated it further. And, the Church Commission investigated and said, well, there were probably 50 people who were being paid. Carl Bernstein said there were more than 400 people who were being paid to plant information. And so the information receiving that's being managed by government, nothing is more dangerous and damaging to our freedom than this whole information management. And today it's putting us at odds with our neighbors, and that's not a good thing.
Correct. Okay. Well, I want to move on because I'm a guy who likes to find a problem and solve it. So our last question for conversation is, what can we do about it? And Dale Parrish has first dibs on this.
Well, with like so many of the issues that we discuss on the roundtable, what can we do about it? We can call for a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution that would deal with the breadth and control of our federal government. And this would certainly, censorship would certainly play a role in that. So,
yep.
Would it solve it completely? No, but I think it would be it would be something that we could take a big step toward.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Okay. Now, while we wait for that to happen, because
Right.
I hope it will happen in a few years, while I'm still young enough to know that it's happening. While we wait for that to happen, what else can we do to combat censorship in our daily lives? Charles?
I think the most important, how people are always saying there should be classes on economics or, and deep economics, or even, well, maybe not deep, but just basic, this is what a mortgage is and this is how you pay your taxes, that type of stuff in public school that they largely ignore. I think the most important today would be media literacy. I think media literacy is at an all-time low, and that's, as Gary kind of hinted at, that the powers that be don't want you to be very media literate because they want you to just accept everything that comes your way. So if people are made aware, if they practice media literacy, then this is something that, censorship becomes easy to see and point out and be aware of, and you have less of these drones of people, these zombies who don't, by not understanding the media, they just take everything at face value, and that's terrifying. And so you need to combat that with media literacy.
Media literacy. Dale Tipton.
Well, just thinking on that same vein, the average American citizen, I believe, is really pretty silent. We go about our day-to-day activities and we don't really speak out about much. We all observe these things happening, and we talk about how, what a shame it is and how the country's faltering and all of that kind of stuff. But I think censorship, like so many of these other things that we talk about, whenever it's noticed, people need to stand up and say something about it. They need to write letters to their legislature. They need to, to stand up at civic groups and that kind of thing anytime it's in play and say, this is wrong. This violates the First Amendment. Why are you guys doing that? But largely we're a quiet group of people that are pretty, at least traditionally, we've been pretty satisfied with our lives and what's happened with our jobs, careers, and the ability to raise our family. And so that has basically silenced us, and we've put undue faith and trust in the people that we have elected to represent us. And that stewardship now has to be carefully questioned.
Indeed. Ken?
I think just to follow up on what Charlie and Dale are talking about here is, to a certain degree, we all understand self-governance. And I think media literacy, and certainly what Dale is saying, is we really need to, I think we need to be able to open up debate in this country again. I think that's another form of censorship. Debate has been censored out of this. We hear one side. I think we need to hear more truth and debated, and have more people see that debate, to understand that, things like that Facebook has done and other social media platforms, things that have happened, that I really, the only thing that we can hope that people see is the self-governance involved in saying, hey, I'm done with that. I'm not going to let my kids have a phone at 5 to be on Facebook. And hopefully with self-governance, capitalism comes in, and those companies disappear because of what they do. I know it's a steep order, but I think certainly the media literacy and getting back to some moral code in this country could eventually sift out the evil, because that's what I call it, evil.
Yeah, it is. It is. And under that category of media literacy, I think comes the responsibility of informed citizens to find alternate sources of news, because it's not just the big three broadcast networks plus CNN and Fox. For example, I'm an auditory learner. Means I like to take in information through my hearing. Most people are visual learners, but I'm an oddball, and I'm auditory. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I learn a lot of things that turn out to be true from people like Senator Ted Cruz. He has a podcast that comes on 3 days a week. Cheryl Atkinson, former investigative reporter at CBS, back when CBS was a news organization, and she finally resigned from CBS because she saw what it had become, and she didn't want to belong to it anymore. And so she struck out on her own. And astute citizens can find alternate sources of news and information, not only in podcasts, but in YouTube channels, and find out the things that the main or the corporate media suppress. And I say corporate media because they're in business for one reason, and that is to make a buck. And the companies who spend billions of dollars buying ads on these so-called news channels kind of control the narrative, because if there's a story they don't want out on the news, the corporate media won't put it out on the news. Okay, so find alternate sources. Ken.
Yeah, if I could just send back a comment on what you're talking about, I think we're starting to see a bit of that. As an example, the whole issue with what's happened here with the executive at NPR. There's a gentleman who was with that, what was he, 25, 30 years, and he finally said, "Hey, it's 100% one way." So I think maybe if there's a bright side to our whole conversation tonight, and certainly I'd like to see some more bright sides than anything, I think that some of this is starting to turn around.
Yeah, Uri Berliner is his name.
Yes.
Charles?
Something that I look forward to, if we can all kind of survive this, this early 21st century turmoil that's threatening, AI and World War III, if we can get past all this, what we still have, the whole digital revolution is still very young. You're just now having these kids. And I know with all my nieces and nephews, they all have iPads. Every time Uncle Charlie walks through the door, he collects them all and he puts them up high, and then we go do something fun. But my hope is that, just as with all things, that after several generations, we'll figure out how to basically have a new digital etiquette for how to cooperate, and with civility in a digital age. And that can only come with time. I always use the example as something as simple as, I'm sure all of us have a time where you've gotten in the elevator with somebody and they have headphones on. And if you ask me, it should just be, like general societal etiquette is, you get into a confined space with one other person, you just politely pop those out. Even if you don't talk to the other person, just, you just stand there without just, but I live on a walking path, and I'm guilty of it too. Everybody has headphones in because they want to walk and multitask and all that. But I make sure to say hi to people. Some people, they just put those in or they just stare at their phone like that. And you hope that given enough time, we'll start to see people like that and essentially shame them. Shame on you. You're just living in your own world. My point being that over time, hopefully, we will develop a new etiquette in the digital age that will, allow us to coexist with our technology, whereas we're still in the initial ripples of the explosion and we're all just psychotic because of it. We haven't quite figured it out yet.
That's a great vision for the future, and I hope to see it come to pass. I think I'm going to give the last word to Dale Parrish.
I didn't have anything.
Well, your hand is up in the air, man.
Another bug.
Well, then Charlie had the last word. So I want to say that this brings us to the end of this month's roundtable. And before we close it out, I want to give you our email address. If you have any questions at all about Convention of States, send an email to this address, raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. That's raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. Our communications people monitor that, and they'll either answer you or they'll feed it to us for a future roundtable or something like that. And now I want to show you a conversation that I had with our state director, Dale Tipton, about how you can get involved, and we're calling it Indiana Needs You.
Well, we're going to talk about getting district captains this evening, John. So.
Yep. Let's hear it.
District captains form the backbone of the Convention of States movement, fulfilling our vision of a citizen network that restores self-governance in America. As a district captain, you will help recruit, welcome, and educate other volunteers in your local area. You may also inform in-district volunteers of when they can have their voices heard at committee hearings at their state capital. COS provides cutting-edge training and connects you with patriots who have been exactly where you are starting. So get on the front lines of the movement to reclaim liberty. Apply today at conventionofstates.com.
Hey, that was cool. That was a whole lot better than looking at me and Dale for 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. I want to invite our viewers to be sure to tune in next Monday, April the 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern for our next in COS Indiana Live. And you see there on the word crawl at the bottom what it's going to be about: servant leadership and regional director and a new COS volunteer. So that's next Monday night. And our next roundtable happens to be on Memorial Day. The fourth Monday of May is the 27th, and that's Memorial Day. So we won't be live, but we will be showing you a best of COS roundtable. And to close us out, here's a message from our national COS president, Mark Meckler, and it's called "The Day I'll Quit Fighting."
I struggle to empathize with people who would give up. It doesn't make sense to me. Sam Adams said, for those of you who prefer safety and security over liberty, over the animating fight for liberty, I hope that you enjoy licking the hands that feed you. May your chains rest lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen. Like, do you understand that your kids and you are sentencing your kids and your grandkids and your friends' kids and your neighbors' kids to a lifetime of slavery and servitude, literally, of fear, of living in the darkness? But never, ever, never, never, never give up. George Washington lost the majority of his battles that he fought in the American Revolution. If you read his writings, if you read the letters where he was writing to Congress asking for money and troops, he was saying, we're losing. I don't have the troops I need. I don't have the supplies I need. Did he quit? What about the guys on the beach at Normandy? Like, what did they do? Did they just quit? Oh, there's, a lot of guys are dying around me. It's really bad. It looks really dismal. Those cliffs are huge. Machine gun fire raining down on us. And it's too hard. We should just quit. Thank God those people didn't quit. If they had, where would we be? I get discouraged, for sure. And I will quit fighting at some point. And that point is when the first shovel of dirt hits the top of my box 6 feet down.